It's Sunday. Do you mind if I take you to church? Okay, 47 years ago, St. Edward's Catholic Church in Youngstown, Ohio. Now, I know not everybody's a Catholic, so I'll give you some of the background and how it works. At that time, it was just after the Catholic Church decided that we wouldn't say the Mass in Latin any longer and actually say it in English. We take a while to do stuff, right? And I know in a lot of religions, and I've looked at different services, there's a lot of jumping out of your seat and there's a lot of charismatic stuff going on. We move around in the Catholic Church too. You know the Catholic calisthenics? Sit, stand, kneel, sit, stand, kneel, sit. Right, you get that? So the little insight for you, though, is we don't necessarily do that just for exercise. We just started speaking in English. When we pray, it's very solemn and quiet. At the time the English came in after the Latin was the first time we ever sang a hymn in church. It was all quiet, very solemn and very peaceful. When we kneel down that one time right before Holy Communion, what we're doing is we're asking God to help us be worthy to receive the Holy Sacrament of Communion. Some people might be checking out the outfit of the lady in the next pew, but that's what we're doing. Very quiet, very, very solemn. So it was 47 years ago, and the other person in our story is my brother-in-law, John. He's 3 years old. By any definition, John was a hellraiser. He knew the principal's office intimately at school. He was the youngest of 6 children. You all know my wife, Holly, or most of you do. That's Holly back there. This is Holly's younger brother, her baby brother. The older brothers and sisters, to get some peace and quiet, would frequently hang John on a hook on the closet door just to get a little peace. John, you get what John's up to, right? Now, up, down, kneel, kneel. One of the things that's very important, we have the kneeler in church because we're going to kneel down. We've got bad knees from all this kneeling we do. We actually have a kneeler built into the pew. Big cavernous church. We've got the stained glass. Sound travels. You smell the incense from the last funeral that was conducted there, right? You get the spirit of what's happening. Very solemn prayer. Well, little John is a little bored. So he reaches into his mom's purse and pulls out her rosary beads. Now, I don't know if you know what rosary beads are used for, but it's a series of beads. It's kind of an oblong. It's got a little string with beads, and then there's a crucifix. It's Jesus on the cross. And the tool of the rosary beads is to facilitate very solemn, quiet prayer. So unlike prayers on Facebook, you know, like, Santa Claus, can I get this? Please God, right? Those prayers. This is a very meditative prayer, very quiet. So we've got a very solemn setting, very quiet setting. You hear, Nate, you know that sound, that little creak that the pew makes because it's so quiet in the church. And then there's this thing, when we kneel down, the people in the pew in front of us also kneel down. So there's this space that's created in the pew in front of you. Little John has the rosary beads. 3 years old. He stands up on the kneeler. He starts. In that quiet, you hear the 3-year-old voice echo, "Hang on, Jesus, you're going for a ride." For a good Catholic family of 8 sitting there, it's a little embarrassing, right? I promised in our description today that we would deconstruct and talk about a portion of what we do up here on the platform. And we're going to do that around stories. Now, we're going to talk about a certain kind of story, but our stories are important, aren't they? We want to share our stories. Now, I remembered that story, and I chose that story to start out with today because we almost lost that story. Holly's mom and dad, Al and Eleanor, Al and Elle, Al spent the last 8 years of his life in a wheelchair. He had had a stroke, and he was partially paralyzed, and it affected his speech. And Al didn't talk a lot. He was a quiet guy. I actually met him one time before his stroke, so I always knew him in the wheelchair. And his wife, Eleanor, a spitfire, a shock of white, beautiful hair. She cared for her husband. It was hard work. You can imagine. That's hard stuff. She was such a bubbly personality. We knew that Al was going to pass away soon. He was having congestive heart failure, going to the hospital regularly. We're ready to go, and then he would somehow hang on. She was going through all that. And we actually were like trying to figure out who we were going to set her up with on dates because she was such a bubbly personality. Well, here's what happened. 2 months before Al passed away, Eleanor had a heart attack and died suddenly. I know, sad. It was 20 years ago. We're okay. But here's the point. For 2 months, we had Al's stories. What we found out that he wasn't quiet because of the stroke. He was quiet because his wife did all the talking. So he told us story after story, a treasure, right? And we got the hang on Jesus, you're going for a ride story. There's no point to that story. We share stories in our speech just for fun sometimes, and that's okay. But my point with telling you today was that we need to treasure these stories. We need to do a better job of these stories.